The story begins in what seems like a calm and picture-perfect neighborhood. Families enjoy their homes, children play in the streets, and everything looks normal on the surface. Our main family is introduced here as ordinary people who just want to live peacefully. To bring joy to their kids, they build a treehouse in their backyard. It's not just a small project. It becomes a symbol of family bonding, weekend fun, and childhood memories in the making. At first, the treehouse is nothing but happiness for the family. The kids love it, the parents are proud of it, and even some neighbors admire the effort. But in the background, another character slowly steps into the story: the HOA, Homeowners Association. Unlike the family, the HOA is shown as rigid, controlling, and overly strict about rules that most residents find unnecessary. Their presence creates a sense of tension beneath the surface. This introduction sets the stage for conflict. On one side is a family focused on love and simple joys, and on the other is an HOA that prioritizes power and control. The contrast between peace and authority lays the foundation for the drama that is about to unfold. After the treehouse became a source of joy for the family, the calm atmosphere didn't last long. The HOA soon found a way to interfere. One morning, the family received an official letter slipped into their mailbox. At first, they thought it might be a routine notice, but when they opened it, they were shocked. The letter demanded payment of what the HOA called a treehouse tax. According to the notice, the family owed hundreds of dollars for building and maintaining an unapproved structure on their property. The family couldn't believe what they were reading. Nowhere in the HOA's bylaws or community rules was there any mention of such a tax. It was made up. Clearly, an attempt by the HOA board to squeeze money from residents who didn't follow their every order. The parents laughed it off at first, assuming it was just a mistake, and decided not to pay. But the HOA wasn't joking. Within days, another letter arrived, this one harsher in tone. It threatened daily fines if the tax was not paid. The HOA claimed the treehouse lowered neighborhood property values and violated community standards. These excuses were vague and unsupported, but the HOA acted as though their word was law. The family stood firm, refusing to be intimidated. They knew they had rights and that the HOA couldn't legally invent a new tax. Still, the letters kept coming. Notices were taped to their door, emails flooded their inbox, and board members even showed up at their house to pressure them. Each time, the family calmly explained that no such tax existed, but the HOA refused to back down. The situation escalated further when the HOA began sending warning signs addressed to the children, claiming the treehouse would soon be removed if the family did not comply. This cruel tactic was designed to break their spirit and create fear. The kids were upset, but the parents reassured them that the treehouse was theirs to enjoy, and no HOA could take it away without cause. Neighbors started to whisper about what was happening. Some sympathized with the family, agreeing that the HOA had gone too far. Others, fearful of the HOA's power, avoided getting involved. The entire neighborhood began to feel the tension, as if everyone was waiting to see who would win this standoff. For the family, the issue wasn't just about money. It was about principle. Paying this so-called treehouse tax would mean admitting the HOA had authority it didn't actually possess. The parents decided they would not give in, no matter how many threats came their way. They knew this battle was just beginning, and the HOA was preparing to push even harder. This outline section highlights the turning point where a happy family project becomes the center of a power struggle. The HOA shows its arrogance by inventing rules, while the family shows strength by standing up to them. The stage is now set for a dramatic clash that will only grow more intense.
The HOA's arrogance became more obvious with every passing week. Instead of backing down when the family refused to pay the so-called treehouse tax, the board doubled their efforts. To them, this wasn't about one treehouse. It was about control. They wanted to prove that no resident could challenge their authority and get away with it. The family began receiving official-looking violation letters almost weekly. Each letter claimed the treehouse violated a different rule. It was too tall. It was an unapproved structure. It posed safety risks, and it blocked the neighborhood's natural aesthetic. The problem was that none of these accusations matched the actual bylaws. The HOA was stretching vague rules, twisting them to fit their narrative. Meetings were held in the neighborhood clubhouse, where the HOA board openly criticized the family in front of other residents. They painted the parents as troublemakers who didn't respect community standards. Some neighbors, intimidated by the HOA, nodded along. Others quietly disagreed but stayed silent, not wanting to become the next target. The family, however, refused to bow down. They attended these meetings, calmly presenting their case. They asked for proof of the so-called rules and requested documentation about the tax. Each time, the HOA dodged their questions, instead resorting to threats of escalating fines and possible legal action. Their arrogance was so thick that they believed their word alone carried more weight than the actual law. The HOA president, in particular, took the situation personally. He acted as though the treehouse was a direct challenge to his authority. He would show up in front of the family's home, clipboard in hand, glaring at the structure as if it were an enemy fortress. His attitude spread through the board, who all felt empowered to bully one family to make an example for the rest. What made the situation even more frustrating was how small the issue truly was. It wasn't about money. The tax was not significant enough to harm the HOA's finances. It wasn't about aesthetics either. The treehouse was built neatly and didn't disturb anyone. The real issue was ego. The HOA couldn't stand that a family had dared to say no. For the children, the tension was confusing. What started as a place for fun now became a battleground. They could see the anger on the faces of board members whenever they passed by, yet their parents encouraged them to not lose hope, reminding them that bullies always reveal their weakness eventually. The family's resolve only grew stronger. They knew the HOA was bluffing, making up rules to scare them, but deep down the HOA believed it was untouchable. The board felt confident that no one in the neighborhood could ever match their power. What they didn't know was that this family was no ordinary family. The arrogance of the HOA was about to collide with a truth that would change everything, and soon the board members would realize they had picked the wrong fight. The day the HOA made good on its threats is remembered in the neighborhood as the Demolition Day. It started quietly, like any other morning. The kids were in their treehouse, playing games and laughing, while their parents enjoyed coffee on the porch. But suddenly, the rumble of trucks broke the peace. A group of contractors, hired by the HOA, pulled up with ladders, power tools, and even a small bulldozer. At first, the family thought it must be a mistake. Surely no one would dare touch private property without permission. But when they saw the HOA president marching toward their yard with papers in his hand, they realized this was no bluff. The contractors, following his orders, began to surround the treehouse. The children's laughter turned to panic as strangers started climbing up to dismantle their beloved hideaway. Boards were ripped out, nails clattered to the ground, and the carefully built structure began to collapse piece by piece. The kids cried out, begging the men to stop, while their parents held them back, powerless in that moment. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains or stood silently at the edge of the street, too afraid to intervene. For the family, this was humiliation on full display. Their happy project was being destroyed in front of their eyes, not because it was unsafe or illegal, but because of the HOA's pride. The president strutted around like a king enforcing his will, acting as though this victory proved his authority was absolute. He smirked at the family, daring them to fight back. The parents stayed calm on the surface, but inside they were boiling. Every nail pulled from the wood was like an insult, every smashed plank a reminder of the HOA's arrogance. The children wept openly, their joy stolen in a single morning. What had been a symbol of family unity was now reduced to a pile of broken boards and shattered dreams. As the last pieces of the treehouse came crashing down, the HOA board congratulated themselves. They believed they had won, that they had shown the entire neighborhood what happens when someone dares to disobey their rules. To them, this was more than demolition. It was a public message. But what the HOA didn't realize was that this act had crossed a line. Until now, the family had treated the fight as an argument about principle, something that could be resolved with patience and reason. But the destruction of the treehouse changed everything. It was no longer just about a structure in the backyard. It was about dignity, rights, and justice. The family didn't shout, didn't fight, didn't even argue as the dust settled. Instead, they exchanged quiet looks, silently agreeing on one thing. The HOA had made a grave mistake. What the HOA thought was their ultimate show of strength was in reality the moment they sealed their downfall. Because the family wasn't powerless at all. They were feds, and soon the board members would learn what happens when arrogance collides with real authority.
After the demolition, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Some residents were shocked at the HOA's audacity. Others were quietly relieved it hadn't happened to them. But inside the family's home, the mood was different. The parents weren't broken. They were calculating. The kids, though sad, noticed a calm determination in their parents' eyes. This was the moment the family decided to stop playing defense. Until now, the HOA had no idea who they were really dealing with. To them, the family looked ordinary, a couple with kids, living in a modest house like everyone else. But behind that image lay a truth that would completely shift the balance of power. The father wasn't just a homeowner. He worked with the FBI, specializing in financial crimes. He had years of experience exposing corruption, tracing dirty money, and putting fraudsters behind bars. The mother, equally formidable, worked with the IRS. Her specialty was tax law, auditing, and uncovering hidden accounts. And they weren't alone. The uncle, who often visited, was with the ATF. Their eldest daughter, though still in college, was interning with the Department of Justice. Even the grandfather had once been in federal law enforcement. In short, this wasn't just a family. It was a network of federal expertise sitting right in the middle of the HOA's crosshairs. The HOA's arrogance blinded them. They thought they were punishing ordinary people who didn't follow the rules. But in truth, they had just demolished the treehouse of a family trained to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle corrupt organizations. Around the dinner table that evening, the family discussed their next steps. The father explained how HOA boards often mishandled money and operated outside the law. The mother noted that the so-called treehouse tax was more than unfair. It could be considered fraud if they were collecting fees without legal authority. The uncle added that intimidation tactics, like harassing children with letters, could amount to harassment charges. The kids listened eye wide, realizing their parents weren't helpless victims. They were professionals who had spent their lives dealing with bullies far bigger than a neighborhood HOA. And this time, the fight had become personal. This reveal marked the true turning point of the story. No longer was it about a treehouse, it was about justice. The family wasn't just going to rebuild, they were going to dig into the HOA's operations with the same skills they used in their federal work. Every document, every meeting note, every bank statement connected to the HOA would now be under a microscope. The HOA thought they had broken a family. In reality, they had awakened investigators, auditors, and agents who were more than capable of dismantling their entire operation. And so the family prepared quietly, gathering resources, reaching out to contacts, and planning their response. The HOA had crossed a line, and soon they would discover that they had picked a fight with the wrong people.
federal people. Once the truth about the family's background came into focus, everything changed. The HOA still strutted around the neighborhood, convinced they had delivered a crushing blow by tearing down the treehouse. But behind closed doors, the family was already mobilizing their skills. What the HOA didn't realize was that their every move was about to be scrutinized with professional precision. The father began by digging into the HOA's finances. Since he worked in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, he knew exactly what to look for: irregular spending patterns, hidden accounts, and suspicious transfers. It didn't take long for him to notice that a large percentage of HOA dues collected from residents didn't match up with the HOA's official expenses. Money meant for maintenance and community projects seemed to be disappearing into thin air. Meanwhile, the mother used her IRS expertise to study the HOA's tax filings. She quickly spotted inconsistencies. Certain fees being charged to residents weren't documented anywhere in the official records. Even more suspicious, some board members appeared to be using HOA funds for personal luxuries, vacations, home renovations, and even expensive cars. On paper, it looked like organized fraud disguised as community management. The uncle, with his ATF background, focused on the intimidation tactics. He interviewed sympathetic neighbors quietly, gathering testimony about harassment, threats, and the bullying culture the HOA enforced. Some residents admitted they had been fined for absurd reasons, like painting their doors the wrong shade of beige or leaving garden tools visible for too long. Others confessed they paid made-up fees just to avoid confrontation. All of this built a picture of systematic abuse. The eldest daughter, interning with the Department of Justice, helped organize the evidence into airtight case files. She learned quickly from her parents, cross-referencing documents, logging testimonies, and building a timeline of the HOA's unlawful actions. She even pulled public records on board members, uncovering past bankruptcies, lawsuits, and shady business dealings that explained their eagerness to exploit the HOA for money. What started as a personal mission soon grew into something much bigger. The family realized that this HOA wasn't just bullying them, it had been preying on the entire community for years. The so-called treehouse tax was only the tip of the iceberg. Each night, the family gathered around the dining table, turning it into a war room. Stacks of papers, laptops, and files covered the surface as they pieced together the puzzle. Every new discovery added weight to the case. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the HOA board wasn't just arrogant, it was corrupt to its core. By the end of their investigation phase, the family had compiled enough evidence to make a federal prosecutor's mouth water. Fraud, tax evasion, harassment, abuse of power, it was all there. The family knew it was only a matter of time before the HOA would be forced to answer for everything they had done. The treehouse may have been torn down, but the foundation of the HOA's empire was about to crumble even faster.
The walls began to close in on the HOA as the family quietly built their case. At first, the board members had no idea they were being investigated. They strutted through the neighborhood, proud of their victory over the treehouse. But slowly, subtle changes began to unsettle them. Residents they once bullied into silence stopped avoiding eye contact. Some neighbors even whispered about something big coming. The power the HOA once flaunted so easily was slipping. The father compiled a financial report that showed money being siphoned from community funds into personal accounts. He cross-referenced bank transfers with receipts, exposing vacations and home upgrades that had been paid for with HOA dues. The mother documented every irregular tax filing, building an airtight case for fraud and misrepresentation. The uncle gathered first-hand accounts from residents who had been threatened or fined for fabricated reasons. And the daughter packaged everything into organized case files that painted a clear picture of corruption. When the family quietly tipped off their federal contacts, the investigation gained momentum. Soon, subpoenas were issued, and HOA board members were summoned for questioning. Their arrogance began to crack. At board meetings, where they once spoke with authority, their voices now trembled. Neighbors asked hard questions about finances, repairs, and missing funds. The president tried to deflect, but the evidence was too strong. Behind closed doors, panic spread among the board. Emails between members revealed their fear of exposure. Some begged others to delete old records, while others discussed resigning before things got worse. But it was already too late. The family's evidence had been passed to federal investigators, and now every suspicious transaction, every false tax record, and every abusive action was under scrutiny. The HOA president, once smug and untouchable, began to lose his grip. He noticed unmarked cars parked near his home. He received letters from attorneys demanding documents. His once loyal board members started turning on him, each one afraid of being left holding the bag. The confidence he had flaunted while tearing down the treehouse was now replaced with paranoia. Meanwhile, the neighborhood shifted. Residents who had lived in fear of the HOA found courage in the family's actions. People began speaking out, sharing their own experiences of being bullied or fined. A collective voice of resistance grew louder. What had once been a one-family battle had become a community-wide movement. The HOA board was officially cornered. The more they tried to cover their tracks, the more evidence piled against them. They were stuck in a tightening trap, every exit blocked by the family's investigation and federal oversight. What had begun as a petty act of arrogance, the demolition of a treehouse, had spiraled into a full-blown scandal that threatened to bring down the entire HOA. And as the board members sat under the weight of looming charges, they realized a painful truth. They had chosen the wrong family to pick a fight with. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, the courtroom. After months of gathering evidence, filing complaints, and working with federal contacts, the family's case against the HOA was no longer just neighborhood gossip. It was a full-scale legal battle. The day of the first hearing, the courthouse was packed. Neighbors who had once feared the HOA showed up to support the family, eager to see justice served. The HOA board members, usually arrogant and smug, looked pale and shaken as they entered the courtroom. Their attorneys carried boxes of documents, but even those couldn't cover the mountain of evidence stacked against them. The prosecution, aided by the family's meticulous work, presented a devastating case. Financial records showed clear embezzlement. Tax filings revealed deliberate fraud. Testimonies from residents exposed years of bullying, harassment, and intimidation. Every lie the HOA had spun about protecting community standards was stripped bare, revealing greed and corruption at its core. The HOA's defense tried everything, claiming the treehouse was unsafe, arguing that the board acted in the best interest of the community, and even blaming individual members for mistakes. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The judge, unimpressed with their excuses, pressed them hard for answers. Why were HOA dues funding personal vacations? Why had fines been issued without legal basis? Why were tax filings inconsistent? Every question left the board more cornered. The family, calm and composed, sat together during the proceedings. They didn't need to say much. Their work spoke for itself. Their attorneys highlighted the demolition of the treehouse as the triggering event that exposed a deeper web of misconduct. What had begun as a petty attempt to enforce fake authority was now a federal-level scandal. Neighbors who testified added emotional weight. One elderly couple described how they had paid fees for years out of fear of losing their home. A single mother recounted being fined for letting her child's bike sit outside overnight. Story after story painted the HOA as not just corrupt, but cruel. The climax came when the judge delivered a stern lecture to the board. She condemned their misuse of power, their harassment of residents, and their financial crimes.
The HOA president, once the loudest and most arrogant of all, sat silently, his head in his hands, knowing the fight was over. The ruling was decisive. Heavy fines, criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, removal of the entire board, and restitution for affected residents. The family was awarded damages for emotional distress and property destruction. More importantly, the judge ordered oversight of the HOA's future operations to ensure such abuse could never happen again. What the HOA thought would be a simple demolition had exploded into a courtroom defeat that destroyed their power. The family walked out not just victorious, but as heroes in the eyes of their neighbors. Justice wasn't just served, it was served publicly, with the HOA's arrogance laid bare for all to see.
With the legal battle behind them, the family finally had their long-awaited moment of victory. The court's decision not only punished the corrupt HOA, but also restored dignity to every resident who had lived under its shadow. For the first time in years, the community felt free. The HOA board members faced serious consequences. The president, once the most arrogant of them all, was ordered to pay restitution for misusing funds and was later indicted on fraud charges. Other board members were fined heavily and banned from holding positions of authority in any HOA again. Some even faced jail time for their role in the embezzlement scheme. Their power had completely collapsed. The family, on the other hand, received more than just financial compensation. They were awarded damages for the emotional distress caused by the demolition of the treehouse, as well as funds to rebuild it. But what mattered most to them was the moral victory, proving that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, can be defeated when you stand your ground. Neighbors celebrated alongside the family. Residents who had once been too afraid to speak now openly shared their relief. They no longer had to worry about absurd fines or fake fees. Children could play freely without fear of board members writing up violations. The family's courage had set everyone free, and the neighborhood slowly began to heal. The demolition of the treehouse, which had once symbolized heartbreak, now became a symbol of resilience. Determined to reclaim what was stolen from them, the family rebuilt the treehouse, bigger, stronger, and better than before. Neighbors pitched in to help, turning it into a community project. Where once there had been intimidation and division, now there was unity and laughter. The kids, who had cried when their hideaway was destroyed, now climbed into their new treehouse with pride. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof that their family had stood tall against injustice. Every time they played inside, it reminded them that no one could take away their joy without consequence. The family didn't stop there. With their expertise and connections, they helped establish a new neighborhood committee to ensure transparency in future HOA decisions. Instead of fear-driven rules, the community embraced fairness and cooperation. The toxic culture the old HOA had built was replaced by one of trust. Justice was more than just legal. It was personal, emotional, and symbolic. The family had not only restored balance in their neighborhood, but also inspired others to resist unfair authority. Their victory sent a clear message: homeowners are not powerless, and no HOA can place itself above the law. In the end, the family's unity, courage, and quiet strength transformed a painful experience into a powerful triumph. What started as an act of arrogance by the HOA ended as a story of justice, resilience, and community pride. The conclusion of the story ties everything together, showing not only the downfall of the corrupt HOA, but also the resilience of a family that refused to bow down. What began as a simple treehouse project turned into a full-blown battle for justice, and in the end, the moral was clear: power-hungry organizations cannot bully people forever. After the courtroom victory and the rebuilding of the treehouse, the family reflected on the journey. At first, they had only wanted to give their kids a space to play, a symbol of joy and childhood. But the HOA's arrogance turned that dream into a battlefield. Still, instead of allowing defeat to break them, they transformed their pain into strength. The new treehouse stood proudly in the backyard, larger and sturdier than before. Neighbors gathered for its grand opening, bringing food, tools, and laughter. What the HOA had once tried to destroy now became the centerpiece of community unity. Children from all around the neighborhood played there, a reminder that joy cannot be bulldozed by intimidation. The family's victory also left a lasting legacy. With their help, the community established fair rules and transparent systems, ensuring no board could abuse its power again. The toxic atmosphere of fear that had once hung over the neighborhood was gone, replaced with trust and cooperation. Where residents once whispered in secret about unfair fines, they now openly discussed improvements and ideas for the future. On a personal level, the children learned a powerful life lesson. They saw that standing up to bullies, even when it feels scary, is always worth it. They witnessed how their parents stayed calm, collected evidence, and fought with intelligence rather than anger. That example of resilience and justice would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The moral of the story is simple yet profound. Authority is not absolute, and those who abuse power will eventually face consequences. HOAs, like many institutions, exist to serve communities, not to exploit them. When they forget that purpose, it only takes one courageous family to bring the truth to light. In the story, the HOA board ended in disgrace. Their arrogance and greed destroyed their reputations and exposed them as frauds. For the family, however, the ending was of pride, vindication, and justice. They had proven that even ordinary-looking people, when united and determined, can take on systems much larger than themselves and win. As the sun set on their rebuilt treehouse, the parents sat with their kids, smiling at the sound of laughter filling the air again. They had endured threats, humiliation, and loss, but they emerged stronger than ever. The battle was over, and they had not only won justice for themselves, but also restored freedom for their entire neighborhood. The final lesson? Never underestimate the power of a family standing together, especially when that family just happens to be full of feds.